I get the texture up, I can kind of start going in and defining some of these shapes, following angles, and kind of just looking for. And I'm not really looking I'm not even looking at images right now. You got to kind of know what a mountain looks like. I've looked at enough mountains to kind of know. And I mean, I'm looking at my drawing, which is based off of mountains. I can kind of start to get a little bit darker as I get closer. Mountains tend to get darker as usually they get darker and more contrasty as they move forward. So this is almost a little bit too dark though. And you can, I'm really not adding a lot of detail here. You can go back and start adding just excruciating amounts of detail if you want. And sometimes I do. I mean, sometimes you can go back with a smaller brush and add more details to this stuff. But way here doing these little bits, but I'm going to try to hold off. I don't want to get too careful. In phthalo blue and or phthalo green, Prussian blue, ultramarine blue, and titanium white. That's the painting, and then that's what we're looking at right there. And it is easier, probably, I'm going to say, it's probably easier to make trees in an actual paint than in Photoshop. The trees I made in Photoshop took kind of a long time. But that's kind of, I was trying to paint them the same way I would paint them with real paint. So I wasn't using too many tricks. And I'm trying to think if I need to start adding some yellow to it. I might add a touch of red to it. Alright, so just filling in some of the highlights on some of these trees with this small liner brush. And I do tend to use the liner brush a lot, but I have a bunch of them, and some of them are in really bad shape, and they'll kind of make a really cool mark. So I hang on to all my old brushes just because the older they get, the better they get. And then just filling in some of this snow on top of the roof. I'm trying, making sure not to go too bright. And it's pretty muddy at first. And I'm adding a little bit of, ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue to some of the snow. Kind of give it that king's blue, that real warm blue in the shadows. I want it to be a little bit warmer as it gets closer into the foreground. So I kind of switched from using like cool colors in the background to some of the warmer colors in the foreground. So I'll use some Prussian blue in the background in the mountains. And then as it gets closer, I'll switch to ultramarine blue. It's a little bit, has more of a purpley feel to it. For the cabin, I'm using a cadmium yellow and a vermilion for the red. Vermilion's kind of like a really bright orangey red. I kind of like it a little bit better than cadmium red. Cadmium red tends to get a little bit dark. And then using real stiff paint here, not a lot of, it's not really runny, it's real dry. It's like really stiff. And so as you roll that brush around, it kind of leaves this, nice little texture to it. And so that's kind of the beauty of the small, bad brush, is it makes like, you can make some cool texture with it. Putting some little highlights on there, little snow icicles, and the reflection of the cabin on the deck. Kind of a wet deck probably, so it has little reflective qualities to it. And the same strategy for these bigger pine trees in the foreground, but I'm starting a little bit darker, so the darks on these pine trees need to be darker than the pine trees to the right, and those need to be darker than the pine trees in the very back. So you can see here the contrast between the light and the highlight I'm putting on the pine trees here versus the highlight that went on the mountains. Everything as it gets closer gets brighter usually, and darker. It gets more contrasty, more saturated. And so I didn't want to have any strong highlights in the back on the mountains, and they'd fight with the ones in the front. So as it gets closer, I'm starting to put some of that vermilion into the highlights of the snow, just so it warms it up a little bit, and maybe there's a little bit of glint of it from the cabin, kind of reflects that warm light emanating from the cabin. Typical sphere highlight on the right side of the snowman, and then kind of got that reflected cool light on the left side, with kind of a little coarse shadow creeping in, in the bottom parts of it. These highlights, almost using like straight white almost for the highlights. Probably mixing a touch of vermilion in there, and want them to be really bright. That's like the brightest part, almost even brighter than the snow in the cabin. So the cabin will sit back, but those trees in the snowman will come. They'll come forward. I think for the scarf, I actually did use, I went in with some cadmium red and some vermilion, just because cadmium has this real strong cadmium has this ability to jump like right off the can. It's a really intense red, and it'll pop off the front of the canvas for you. So I think I used some vermilion and cadmium red for the scarf, and for the nose, for the carrot for the nose. And then just finishing it up with some little details and highlights on the details, and that pretty much does it. All right. Oh, hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching.